Thank you for joining us for the Paradigm Shift, Conquering Fear and Aligning to the Awakening. I'm Mia Saenz, your host, and with me this segment is Laura Eisenhower. Welcome, Laura.
Hello, Mia.
Hi, honey.
Good to see you.
Wonderful to see you. I'm so glad that you were joining us because I love your spiritual work, and everything that I read that you write it makes me explode with this woman knows exactly what she's talking about regarding anything, regarding conquering fear, the awakening, any spiritual progress. So I love it. Would you share with the viewers your story on how you got to where you are today?
Well, that's great because it was really all about conquering fear. So this is perfect that we're talking about it. As people know, and if they don't know, my great-grandfather was President Eisenhower. So growing up in this family was an interesting thing. And a lot of times fear is a very repressed thing, maybe something that people don't really want to talk about, but it tends to rule one's life in a very unconscious way. And when I was growing up in this family, with all this hidden stuff that was connected to his presidency that we're finding out now, I could really sense something going on in the world, in the shadows, that we're just really starting to hear about. And so it made me very uncomfortable because this isn't about, family so much, but the level of repression I felt as a being, wanting to express my path and my mission, up against the sort of programmings and hidden agendas that we're dealing with, it was very, very uncomfortable. And at times, I wouldn't say I fell into fear, but I could feel the collective fear. Acting out in very odd ways that was very much about giving one's power away. And that goes to, our governments and religion and, any structure that's external that we rely upon. And so growing up in this family, helped me to see, okay, well, what is it like to be a member of a family that held office in a position that sort of runs that system, I guess you could say. And I knew, deep down that there was hidden layers to the military-industrial complex that many people would, I guess, end up finding out. I didn't realize that much of that would, be through me and my path. But what I was able to overcome was going along with the program, or maybe any expectations that were expected from me, and the fear of what other people think, the fear of death, the fear of loss of love, the fear of really, and I know we all share this, the fear of our own power and the fear of what's going to happen to our planet. What are we really in for? Mm-hmm. And so we have to look at all that stuff, and I think it hits all of us at different phases of our lives. But when I really started to understand my mission and I got really grounded in it, I knew that the biggest part of it wasn't so much about the larger work with the collective. It had to do with me overcoming these inner limitations. A lot of them, of course, are passed down to us, and they're just embedded in our culture, and we don't even recognize that it's fear-based until we kind of fall on our own face and we start to see the truth of who we are, because sometimes there's no hand to hold during those times, and we have no choice but to face ourselves. So that's kind of the story of how I got to where I am today, even though there might have been support of, Laura, are you okay? Is everything okay? The deeper stuff that nobody could really address but myself, which I know a lot of people, have to face, was in overcoming patriarchal energies, government structures, hidden agendas, and the facade that we're seeing in the world, and how to dig into the root of where that all comes from to reclaim our free will sovereignty and our independence and our divinity so that we can ascend into higher earth energies and transcend the fear-based programs and control structures that want to keep us stuck. Nice. So I guess that's it in a nutshell, overcoming fear path.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Some people watching this right now will say, wow, you really dealt with a lot, being an Eisenhower, being the great-granddaughter of a president. That's a lot more than a lot of us have to deal with. Although a family structure has a lot of that fear of the hierarchy and things like that too, but that's an amazing story. I've been lucky enough to interview you before, and I'm fascinated every time I hear your information. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Let's talk about shadow self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the shadow self is just the part of us that's really, I guess you could say, unconscious. Mm-hmm. It's where all sorts of things can sneak in. And when we're really tested, we might find that our shadow self comes out where, oh my gosh, we're all of a sudden really angry or cruel or maybe in fear of the road ahead. It's kind of like the aspects of ourselves that haven't been fully integrated and illuminated, because once we shine a light on the unconscious, we become aware of our multidimensional nature and the fact that we're spiritual beings. But when we're not conscious of that and we're unconscious, all sorts of energies can sneak in there, because really if we're not standing in our power, something else is going to step in and try and run the show. And so the shadow self is a little bit of that power struggle and our reaction to that power struggle, and how out of control that struggle can be, and how difficult it is for us to admit that that's what it's about. When we can start to admit it and we can start to shine a light on our unconscious and see why we behave the way we do, we can start to turn the shadow into wisdom, because we can't all of a sudden turn everything to light. But the beauty of darkness and the shadow is that we gain wisdom. We gain wisdom from pain and adversity, even from duality. I mean, everything that we're experiencing on a soul level is really a teacher. On a physical level is absolutely unjust, and of course we need to call it out. And on a spiritual level, it's an initiation for us to move into a whole other experience that is very, familiar to us. So our shadow is where we sort of get lost in the process. And that's where we really do, our inner work. And when we think about the word shadow government, that's kind of like the underbelly of the collective, where all that power has been given away to these false authority structures. And so all these other energies have stepped in the power of the sovereign free will being that we individually represent. And so when that starts to leak into our personal world, it starts to feed the shadow self. And instead of addressing it and doing the inner work, people want to take the easy way out, which is to have somebody else do it for them. But that tends to take them down a road that leads to a trap, because nobody can empower us, nobody can heal us and cure us but ourselves. And so facing the shadow gives us the opportunity to transform those unconscious tendencies and unconscious programmings into the wisdom and strength to be more conscious with our words, our communication, our behaviors, our actions, and the choices we make on our life path.
So the shadow self is also related to the ego.
I would say that the negative ego definitely feeds the shadow self. Also emotional wounds that haven't been addressed. Mental programmings that people hold on to that sort of amplify the negative ego, because it knows on some level it's not natural. On another level it wants to defend it at all costs, because it's built an identity around it.
Right.
And so the in-between phase is the emotional breakdown, which leads to a transformation, but people can very often get caught in the middle of it and not know how to get out.
Right.
And that's where we can easily give our power away. But when we can get out, it's almost like that's the initiation, and one can easily recognize, wow, after I survive that, nothing can really get me anymore. And
Right.
A lot of people say that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Another scary thing for people that are shifting into an awakening process is the dark night of the soul. Let's talk about that.
Dark night of the soul is, I think it's triggered with, at first, an identity crisis. When all of a sudden the world that you thought was moving along in a certain way, all of a sudden starts to change. A lot of times that has to do with the outer planets like Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune. It's what we're aspiring towards, we have to realize. But when we hit energies like Saturn and some of the more personal planets where we're limited, we're up against sort of the controls and also our highest potential. And so in that in-between, similar to the shadow self, we can get very lost. And it's sort of an untangling of us from the matrix, the dark night of the soul. It helps us to go through an ego death so that we can see the truth of who we really are. But because we're sort of taken advantage of when we're in that, it's very easy to fall into addiction and to, get medicated and to judge it and label it and diagnose it as a serious problem. It could be, diagnosis of depression or being withdrawn. And then if those emotions can't get expressed, it starts to get into the mind, and the mind can start to get unstable because the emotions have to express themselves.
Right.
So the dark night of the soul is one's ability to say, okay, I'm going to shut out the outer world and understand that this is a deep process, it's a personal process, and it's a journey. So the best thing one can do is get prepared and focus on holding that inner light so that one can navigate in the darkness with wisdom and with clarity, enough to say I can embrace the mystery and I can trust something greater than myself, and to recognize that it is a form of birthing and it is a form of alchemy in a lot of ways. It's extremely painful for people, though. And, we're not given the time off of work that we would want. You can't just call your boss and say, hey, I'm having a dark night of the soul week. Do you mind? We're
Right.
asked to just push through it, and it's almost like it ends up being a double life where people will just sort of know that something's going on. But it's an amazing, amazing, amazing thing, and it's a blessing to go through that. And it addresses the shadow self, and it also addresses a lot of the energies that we're targeted with.
Right.
It helps us to realize that that's not our truth. But of course, we became addicted to the false programming, and so the loss of it, one almost mourns it. And then after there's enough detachment, it's like this bliss starts to come in, and this feeling of connection to source and what's truly real and divine, and that's what usually lifts it and lifts a person out of it and helps them to get back on track, but on the person's own terms, on a person's spiritual path. And it's like the initiation from the false matrix into the organic ascension timeline. Okay,
wonderful. So let's break that down a little bit for those who are new to spirituality and new to different changes. Because I think that it's really important for people to understand how you first said we can be triggered into the dark night of our soul by something tragic, drastic that happens in our life. A breakup with a partner or something like that. And then people often tend to go into a deep depression because they're not able to get out of it. And then from that point is when they start to get out of it, is to search in a spiritual way, correct?
Yes.
And then that's where the beauty comes, is what you were talking about, that when we dig in and start to do our work.
Right, because once you push past the fear of loss, the fear of abandonment, the fear of, being isolated and alone, and just the fear of survival, because, there's a lot of emotional survival that happens when we go through adversity or loss. Once we can just move through all that and recognize the epiphany of, wait a second, I only need me, and there's unconditional love of spirit, and we all have a divine blueprint of the sacred union of the God-Goddess energy, we can stop giving our power away to our lovers, our friends, even our family. It doesn't mean we abandon them because we fear the abandonment, but we're not so controlled by it. We're able to understand that we have ourselves to fall back on. And when we can trust that we have ourselves to fall back on, we also start to detach a little bit from the government and what we see in the news. We start to really be able to see the BS everywhere once we survive adversity, because it pulls us into a deeper sense of our intuition and our soul journey. And once we arrive there, we get very intuitive and very psychic.
Yeah.
But the process of letting go of all that stuff is very difficult, and so we're asked at times to go through loss and adversity because we may put too much reliance on that relationship at the expense of getting to fully know ourselves.
Right.
There's a lot of healing agreements people have. There's a lot of things that can support how to keep each other addicted to something that two people know that they need to move on from, but they're kind of become buddies in it. And then something might just happen and rip it apart, and that's when one really has to trust that it's all for a reason. There's no true abandonment. There's no true loss. You can't lose something that's truly yours. But we do experience different things along the way to gather parts of ourselves and to release aspects of ourselves that don't serve us anymore. And once we get ourselves aligned with that, then the inner work isn't so confusing and so bewildering and such a place of fear.
Right. So let's also talk about trust, because truly the reverse of fear would be trust and love. And what you're talking about is learning to trust our own knowledge, our own identity to the divine.
Right. And that's key, because I think people put others as placeholders for that. And then they get crushed, and they give all their power away, and it's like, can I trust you? And you put a lot of pressure on that person, and it's like, if you start with trusting yourself, then you can pretty much guarantee that the people you draw into your life are pretty trustworthy. But if you're very lost and you're just reaching for somebody to hold on to, and that person, you can't really count on them, well, you didn't start with counting on yourself, and so it's going to keep playing out.
Right.
And so, trust in the universe, trust in something bigger, larger, the bigger picture, the fact that we're multidimensional, and what we're seeing is not all there is. The thing is, the emotional body carries memories from lifetimes, catastrophes from thousands and thousands of years ago. Our mental body cleans the slate pretty easily, but our emotional body holds on to stuff, and it survives life and death cycles. And somehow, we might find ourselves triggered. We don't know why. We don't fully understand maybe that we have past lives or that we experienced this somewhere down the pike. But our mental body might not be able to articulate it or understand it. It's all stored in the emotions, so that's always an area that needs to be cleared in order for us to see things from a new perspective, because it'll keep playing itself, and everything we hold on to we tend to see. outside of ourselves. Pregnant women see other pregnant women. When we feel insecure, we see people giving us weird looks. When we feel confident, people smile at us. So, if we're not liking our outer reflection,
yes,
we got to do the inner work. And I know that becomes almost cliche that it's all about the inner work and everything on the outside reflects who we are on the inside to a certain degree as far as what we hold on to. But the larger picture is all about the unification to start to fill the shadow with wisdom and with our own empowerment, because when we do that, it has nothing to feed on.
Do you actually work on the cellular DNA, the emotional cellular DNA aspect of it, or is that not part of the work that you do?
When we do combined sessions, we do that. And my partner mostly, has people on the table. He works that part of it. And I utilize these tools to kind of dredge it all up and to help the person dig deep and to help them find a certain level of neutrality, to be the observer, to start to recognize the things, the limitations that are getting in the way and the strengths that may have never been validated that they can begin to feel confident about and step into. And then we work the energy so that the cells and the actual organs in the physical body is having that release. A lot of times when a lot is dredged up, the body's still holding on to it. It's like detoxing without going to the bathroom.
Right.
So, so we work both.
There's a lot of junk that just remains. Yes. Yeah. That's wonderful. I love that. Thank you. And I love that you guys work together like that. That's wonderful. Let's talk about liberating, which is all part of basically what we're talking about, but let's talk about liberation and liberating our, I would assume that when we talked and you sent me information, the liberation that you're talking about is out of our soul, of our being?
Liberation is just letting go of anything that's trying to control us. And fear is one of the biggest ones. That is what they've been playing against us for so long. I don't want to get into, the shadow conspiracy stuff, but we have been on a planet that has sought domination and control, and they have not succeeded for many on an individual level, and that's where it really counts. When we achieve that on an individual level, we start to share that frequency and vibration, because we're the ultimate technology. We're the free energy we're looking for. We are the sound healing technology. Well, liberation is really letting go of anything that controls us. And anytime we find we are affected so deeply by something to the point of reacting constantly and feeling controlled by whether it be information, somebody else's actions, then we're not very liberated. We are still waiting for the external to meet our standards. And we don't have time for that. We have to live our standards. We have to live our truth. Basically, this planet has been under an agenda for domination and control. But we can look at this as the negative ego that wants domination and control over our actions, our relationships, and it can sneak up on us and suppress our higher self. Just like the negative agendas are trying to suppress our ascension and our awareness of who we really are, our divine nature, our higher abilities, our spiritual abilities, because we really are the free energy technology, and it's what we emit that starts to change the outer world, because the earth responds to us. And as we see right now, the earth has responded to us, and it's very toxic. The waters, the fire element, the earth element, and the air, very much, being poisoned and tampered with. But how do we solve that? We have to clear the negative ego, because we're made of earth, air, fire, water. And so when we notice the shift in our outer world when we start to do this work, it's not that necessarily everything is going to get cleaned up, but we start to have an understanding of the larger picture. We have an understanding of really what this positive timeline really means. And it's not just like some timeline we stumble upon and we get lucky. It's who we really are and the path we've always been walking. And so these agendas through fear have tried to steer us away from that, because through fear we give our power away, we buy into the money system, and we look outside of ourselves. And that's not liberation. Liberation is understanding what we're made of on the inside and activating those abilities through being highly conscious in every moment. Understanding that every moment is sacred. The words that we use, the way we treat each other, the food we put into our body, the lifestyles that we lead, that all, comes down to it. And when we start to do things on our own terms, and we start to recognize that we do have free will, and only they can manipulate us out of that, they can't actually take it, then what is there to fear anymore? Because it's not about fearing death. We know we've died before. It's about being very discerning about whether or not we are being controlled, and to really step back and ask ourselves those questions. What is controlling us? What is ruling our moods? How do we feel when we wake up in the morning? What are we passionate about? And what are our excuses for not following our heart and our dreams? and start to look at, okay, well, those are excuses, those are controls, and we don't have to buy into that. And so it's understandable that people get lost in this stuff, but it's a game, and that game is the same game the negative ego plays with us. And the minute we start to say, you know what, you need to follow the guidance of higher self, then that's when the purification starts to happen. And when each of us does that, in terms of how we relate to how we create abundance and how we take care of our survival space, we can let go of the governments and start to say, wait a second, I have much more trust in the universe and spirit and the God goddess that lives within and everywhere to provide exactly what our needs are. And that's part of the spontaneity of embracing the mystery and also being highly creative in how we set our intentions and how we visualize things that we want to manifest. And then push out all self-doubt, all fear, and everything, what mom has to say, what so-and-so has to say, you know, the projections of, oh, you're crazy, you'll never be able to do that, and just filter it out. It has nothing to do with you. And that's liberation, is to just live your truth and to say, who cares what anybody else thinks, but to at least devote oneself to integrity so that the energy flow is not creating karma and not creating more filth. Because it's not about being selfish, it's about finding balance, understanding unity consciousness, and understanding that this is part of natural law and universal laws, and that we're here as humans to learn how to return to that. And it's not a very easy place to learn, but we have completed a lot of these lessons, and so it's going to be easier more than any other time in our existence to move out of fear, because we're in alignment with the galactic plane right now. People are really, really waking up, and it's far easier to be liberated, even if we witness particular scenarios that seem like it's taking us down into doom and gloom. Spirit, you can't trump it. There's nothing more powerful. So we'll never lose connection with it, but the illusion of separation can cause our creative energy to pull us into traps and to take us down roads that will delay us from the inevitable, which is our return home to Source, which of course is within.
Right. And everything that you've been talking about is really getting from point A to point B, which is the awakening process. Do you want to talk just a little bit about what that looks like for the average person who, you know, is all of a sudden dealing with a spiritual crisis? I mean, I know we've talked about this with fear and stuff, but they deal with a crisis that brings them into a spiritual awakening.
Well, the first thing to handle a crisis is to kind of look at it from the observer and from some level of neutrality, to sort of see, well, what is the message here? What led up to this? What can possibly come out of this to make this a good experience? You know, because we're all artists with energy. If you're painting a painting and somebody spills something on it, most people might throw it away and say it's ruined. But a real artist will transform it into something beautiful. And so we have that opportunity all the time to choose perspectives that enable us to grow rather than get defeated, because defeat is a very, very low vibration, and we're very much taken advantage of when we feel defeat. So awakening is understanding the power we have in the moment, and to understand the power of the now, and to be inspired by that instead of in fear of what's going to happen, like we're at the mercy of everything around us. We're in co-creation, and so what we put out and what we receive is a relationship, just like we have with a partner. And so if we're not doing our end, we're not going to get good results. But if we step up and greet the challenges with integrity and with maturity and with wisdom and strength and just creativity and being able to be inventive and look at all the potentials, because the imagination is vast. We can grab at anything to really turn things around. Then we can actually have fun with it. It's no fun to see suffering, but there is the heart energy, and that you can touch somebody in their worst of times just by connecting to the heart. And it's almost like it's a painkiller, and there's a spiritual recognition there that is so beautiful. It's also really important to remember forgiveness and to understand that we're not ruled by the planets, but we're dealing with a lot of forces, and God Goddess is working its energy through us, and it's got its own divine plan, and sometimes things just happen, and it's part of a necessary process for us to unify. And so a lot of people in catastrophe say, oh my gosh, that's the best thing that ever happened to me. I now know my neighbors, we all love each other. Yes. Or somebody says, cancer saved my life because I woke up. Now, there's two perspectives. One could be victim defeat, and one can be empowerment, awakening, and that's where we want to go. And so there's nothing too big for us to handle. It's the belief systems that cause us to feel that way. We can heal anything. Spirit is so powerful. We can turn anything really into gold, and that's alchemy. And it's allowing ourselves to be orientated to our spiritual abilities and to not allow the gravity of the physical pull us down, because that's that's where the negative ego comes in, and that's where we're easily controlled. If we're in survival, if we're in emotional distress, and if we're not empowered, we're going to be controlled. But if we're in our heart and we start to expand into these greater abilities, then we're steering the ship. And we're also in tune with nature, because how we steer the ship depends on the wind and the water. So so it's just a process of trust and understanding what's far greater than us, and to really let go of the projections, because we all grew up being very, very wounded and projected upon for being spiritual beings. So to forgive all those that don't understand, and to start to validate the self when somebody doesn't understand us, rather than invalidate ourselves and start to think, you know, this is all terrible, I'm all alone. And you know what, we're never alone. And we're starting, people are catching up, and we're going to reap the rewards of, you know, our tenacity that we've been holding for a long time. And that's definitely going to come. So it's incredible right now. I mean, we're dealing with some really good stuff.
And I want people to also understand that by living in the moment, you can handle each step through your process of getting to know you and all the things that Laura's talking about. Don't be afraid of the process, because when you do take it moment by moment by moment, you find that surrender and that resolution and that connectedness to spirit that just opens you up grander and grander and grander until you're just a flowing river, and it all comes so easily.
It does, and the important thing too is not to repress anything. We're made of earth, air, fire, and water, and so when those energies need to flow, one needs to let them flow. The ego masks people wear, repress that energy, it becomes internalized, it becomes toxic. So, you know, a part of awakening is being willing to cry, being willing to be vulnerable, being willing to say, hey, I need help and support. Because the more we try and hide it and have pride and just think it's all about being strong and not showing our weaknesses, it's still not hitting the mark. I mean, we have to be genuine, and when we are allowed to, we're being natural, and nature only knows how to regenerate and heal. If we're trying to put a dam up to appear a different way, it starts to create a pressure cooker, and then we find that we snap, and then everybody runs, and then we're even more alone. So.
Yeah, right. So let's talk about the Ascension.
Well, Ascension is definitely an inner shift, and you know, we have to recognize that we already are ascended beings. All we're doing is lifting away all the gunk, all the programmings, all the historical wounds and resentments, and just all the stuff that we have been conditioned to be carrying in this day and age right now by those that aren't looking out for our best interests. The goal for most of the things that have happened in our history and the distortions of our history are so that we don't unite, so that we, you know, are still holding on to the wars, you know, certain unconscious connections to a certain level of racism, maybe not the racism that we're used to, but I'm not sure maybe the right word, but where we remember something and we hold people against it, even though we're in a different place than where we were then. And it's fed through the school systems, it's fed through the media, it's fed through the news, that we will kind of stay in a state of trauma and separation, because it's all about conquer and divide. So Ascension is really about saying, wait a second, that's not our truth, and understanding that we are a global family, we're like a mandala, a web of life. Really, oneness is diversity and harmony. We all get to be who we are, but we work so well together when we honor the differences, because we find that commonality of heart, spirit, the love of our families, the love of our partners, you know, and just the desire to just be fed, taken care of, and just, you know, live a healthy lifestyle. We all want that. So when we're looking at each other in a very divided way, it's the same sort of division we feel on the inside, and so it's really about unity. We already are ascended. When we keep digging and digging into the deepest of layers of ourselves and the creation story, it all started with unity. Then all of a sudden something kind of just went bam. It's like the egg cracked open and all the stuff came out, and now we're regathering it and putting it back. And that's really Ascension, but it's very natural. I think a lot of people call it New Agey, or think we're just going to float away, or it's the rapture. But basically, it's taking all the heavy weights off, the shackles, the fear, the dramas, the resentments, like I said, all those on the list, and starting to feel lighter, starting to find our humor, starting to not take it all too seriously, and remembering that we're in dream time. We are dreaming, but there's been dream warfare. We've been caught in sort of a dream catcher that has not wanted us to progress. It's a dream nightmare catcher more than anything else, and it's basically keeping us in these imprints so that we keep dreaming it into existence, even if those characters aren't around anymore. It's to get us to a certain point where it's inevitable that we're going to cause our own self-destruction because of what we've taken on. And so Ascension is when we start to step away from that, and we start to recognize really, you know, what the truth is, that we all are different versions of each other, and we're different expressions of God, Goddess. And for us to have healthy relationships with ourselves, others, and the collective, we need to create archetypal harmony. Everything got, majorly fragmented, and it's about calling all those aspects back to the self without judgment, without polarizing them, without creating blame, and understanding they're all different parts of us, just like the different organs in our body. But for us to have a healthy system, we have to function in alignment with our immune system, how to build it, how to enhance it, how to allow everything to work well with each other so that one isn't warring the other and we're not dealing with excesses and deficiencies in our body. So Gaia is no different. It's an organism. We're all parts of her. And for her systems and star systems beyond, this planetary sphere to work together in peace and harmony, we have to find that inner balance and harmony within and collect all those aspects back into ourselves, into oneness. And then we'll start to see each other differently. And when we start to see each other differently, an energy gets sort of created. It's our unified spirit that's the immune system of the planet. When we can start to identify with that, the parasitic forces fall away, the disease, the degradation, the toxins, and the poisons. We move into higher earth energies, and the physics are different so that we can handle some of these assaults, because we start to change the dream. Right. There's dream time, and then there's the program version. Mm-hmm. Ascension is stepping away from the program version and stepping into what we already are. Mm-hmm. And then the rewards come, and people can call that ascension, but in actual fact it's just returning to the source and truth of who we are.
Mm-hmm. I love the way you describe that, because a lot of people are so afraid of ascending. They're like, I don't want to go. I don't want to be so spiritual that I rise away. But you're talking about on a basic level of our dealing with our own being. Similar, but also I really appreciate the way you describe that. I've never heard it described like that before. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So I know that the viewers would love to know what your free gift is.
Well, I have a package, and basically it's 26 days to really shift your reality, and it's like a workbook.
Great.
And it'll help people to kind of see where they're creating a dream that they don't want, because of maybe what's out there, and how to get back on track with being empowered and creating what you really want. And so it's just a really good exercise for people to start to train and program the self in the organic sense of the word rather than the artificial. And what's organic? That's us being ourselves. It's us following our dreams and our passions and feeling empowered and knowing that anything that tries to get in the way is just trying to make us stronger and to give us the wisdom we need to push it forward, not step us back. But sometimes that's just a part of the process. And it's healthy. So really good tool. You can find that on my website.
Yes. And then the credits will be on at the end. Thank you. That's a lovely gift. Thank you. That's very wonderful. What else would you like? We're running out of time, so what else would you like to say to the viewers before we sign off?
Well, when you think about your spiritual path, drop the whole judgmental God. Sometimes even if people negate religion, there's still guilt, shame, not being able to forgive the self, and getting all caught up in the mistakes one has made and the things that people have done to us, and just to kind of let that all go, start fresh, and recognize that it was all for a reason, and there is no judgment. There's only the law of balance, really, and we only step out of balance and receive the experiences that we need to get back in alignment, and that's not a judgment. That's just walking true to who we are and bringing back the unification of the masculine and feminine, the right and the left brain, science and spirituality. It's already within us. And so anything that we start to think is going to judge us or condemn us or project upon us for being spiritual beings are only denying the spirit that exists within. And you can only judge yourself. And give yourself a break, cut yourself a lot of slack. There's a lot of technologies and manipulations out there. And this has definitely been a bit of an attack on us, but we're not victims. It's also been a huge test to the human spirit. So embrace the human spirit, because it's the most powerful thing in creation, and we all have access to it. We all are from it. We all can create with it. And when we do, we are just living life amazing. Miracles. Yes. For those who live in the sense of depression all the time, or a lot of the time, or disbelief that things can actually be beautiful, when you do get in your proper alignment is when you see how fantastic your life can be. I love that. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us. This was a true pleasure. Oh, I loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
It's always great to connect with you.
It is. It's wonderful. Thank you, viewers, for watching, and we'll see you in the next segment.